everyone. So let's get down to business. Very lovely to see such a packed room of excited people today. If I wasn't here in a rainy southwest London on a November morning, I might like to be in the Florida Keys. It looks quite nice and relaxing. Now, the Florida Keys, of course, it's very good for being on the beach and drinking pina coladas, but I'm told it's also very good for sports fishing. I've never done it myself, but I can imagine that would be quite a fun thing to do. Now, I'm a biologist, and we spend most of our life trying to collect data and understand the world. And these days, we're deluged with data. We all have a camera in our pocket, but in the past, things like photographs were a bit harder to come by. But one great thing about men is that they love to take pictures of their trophies. And over the last few decades, Florida has always been a particular hotspot in America for sports fishing. And so you can guarantee that everyone that went there made sure they took a good photo of what they caught. This is back in the 80s and then to the 70s. Now, the astute among you will have noticed that that's turned into black and white. Very, very good. But you might see that there seems to be a slight trend. The fish are changing species, and they're getting a little bit bigger. And this trend starts to tell us a little bit about the change that our world has seen over recent decades. And the oldest one that I know of is 1906, and we can see an enormous grouper. You can't catch anything like that anymore. This man is Dr. Dan Pauly, and he's probably the world's most eminent fisheries scientist. And he coined the phrase shifting baseline syndrome. He said, we transform the world, but we don't remember it. We have finite lives, our careers are even shorter, and we're not very good at transmitting intergenerational knowledge. And he described in a seminal paper that the world is changing, but we're not realizing it. And the question is, why do people accept it? It's because they don't know that it was any different. And if you look now, people look just as happy as they looked in the 1950s with their catches. These guys obviously haven't been able to catch a sailfish, so they're holding a picture of one. And if you want to see any more of this, this actually comes from a really, really nice paper that shows just what unusual sources of evidence you can use to understand the world. We're susceptible too. This is a 400-pound sturgeon caught just 120 years ago in the River Severn. Could you imagine doing something like that now? It seems so impossible as to almost be unimaginable. So what has that got to do with you? You're here, November 2023. What possible relevance could this story about the Florida Keys have to you? Well, you're here at the RGS, but you're also here at the bottom of that graph. This is the Living Planet Index. This is one of our most important global indicators of the state of the planet. Expertly put together by WWF, ZSL, and a whole range of partners, including probably people in this room. It takes a few years to collate the data. This is the 2022 edition. Of course, it goes up to 2018. And as you can see, the picture is a little bit bleak. There is an unescapable downwards trend. And you'd think that people might care about that, but one of my hobbies is to look at the news headlines every 2 years when the Living Planet comes out. And I like to think I might be psychic, because I can almost to the word guess exactly what they'll be. It's actually quite amazing if you use Google and you filter by year to see exactly the same headlines every 2 years. And you watch, in 2024, they'll be identical. We make absolutely no difference at all. Literally, no one seems to care. So why is that? That graph seems quite serious, right? That seems to be a pretty big deal. Those fish were definitely getting smaller. Well, that graph started at 1970. Let's have a think about 1970 as a baseline. I'm a very good scientist, so I use Wikipedia a lot. So this is a lovely open source of data about some of the species we've lost. I'm not going to worry about populations. I'm not going to worry about trends. I'm just going to talk to you about extinctions, right? These are things that we know have gone extinct since 1970. Probably an underestimate, but it's Wikipedia, so it's gospel. So we'll just stick with that. There we go. There's 1970. We're just scrolling down the Wikipedia page. Caspian tiger, what a shame. Javan tiger, golden toad, Yangtze River dolphin. A pity. But it looks like the table actually goes back before 1970. So let's have a little look. So we've got the thylacine. That's a pity. We've got the great auk, and we've got the passenger pigeon. That was, incidentally, probably the world's most abundant bird until it went extinct just over 100 years ago. And if we keep going back, we can actually see there seems to be pages. We're on the limit of our intergenerational knowledge now. The dodo. Everyone's heard of that. That went extinct a couple of hundred years ago. You might not have heard of Steller's sea cow, which amazingly went extinct within 28 years of first being described because it was so easy to hunt. And then we start to get to things that seem a little bit harder to imagine. If anyone's been to Madagascar, there was an aye-aye that weighed 2.5 times as much. But of course, we don't really know what it looked like. There's giant birds from New Zealand. But these start to get a bit harder to imagine now. These are disappearing into a realm of, are they real? Are they dinosaurs? Have I just made them up and drawn a picture? Glyptodons, a very nice one as you walk into the Natural History Museum, only went extinct about 4,000 years ago, size of a mini. Giant megapode birds, giant beavers, that would be pretty cool to see. And we're going back, and of course we're in the realm of mammoths and pygmy elephants that lived on Sardinia and in California. And so the only thing I want you to remember from this is that there seems to have been quite a lot of stuff that happened before 1970. History does seem to keep going back. So if we look again at that graph, we think, well, it's very alarming. It says 69%. That's almost 3/4. And we're here right at the bottom of that graph. But it seems like perhaps we need a slightly broader perspective. It seems like perhaps we're suffering from having a not very relevant baseline. I should add that all of those stuff didn't just go extinct for the fun of it. It probably went extinct because of us. This is a map of megafaunal extinctions. Red is bad, blue is not quite so bad. You'll see that Africa still retains quite a lot of its megafauna. If you think about big stuff, you probably think of Africa. But you see, as you go towards Australia, a very high, almost 50–60% extinction rate. North America, South America suffered worse. 78% of animals, I think above 10 kilograms, went extinct within the last 10,000 years. I wonder why. Completely unrelated, this is a map of human expansion over the last 10,000 years. Over the last 100,000 years, sorry. And as you can see, we slowly left Africa about 100,000 years ago. We spread across Asia, we reached Australia, we wiped out the giant wombats, we reached North America, and then finally South America. And everywhere we went, the extinction rate was worse, because we're very clever, we're very good hunters. And these things are dangerous, and so it's better to get rid of them. Incidentally, the only place they seemed to survive in any numbers was Africa. What's different about Africa? Well, everything had the opportunity to co-evolve with us. They learned that we're trouble. And so when you look at conservation in the world, this is the image you need to imagine. Everything in black there is extinct. And so have we lost 70% of our wildlife? No, we've lost much more. But still, I'm telling you this today, and it's a bit hard to imagine, right? It's a bit hard to imagine that glyptodon wandering across the stage. And that's because this stuff, it's too many generations ago. It's too far in the past for us really to think it's relevant to us today. So this is the Pyramid of Djoser. This was built about 4,500 years ago. It's the first of the Egyptian pyramids. Again, that's what I learned from Wikipedia. Please, someone come and correct me if I'm wrong. That was built 1,000 years before the last mammoth went extinct. If you went to Wrangel Island on the beach, you can sometimes find the teeth of mammoths. You can touch them. And if you can touch them, it means they're real, right? It's not just something you saw on TikTok. This is elephant bird. Again, no one ever took a photo. They went extinct before that. So we just stuck with these drawings. And again, that means, are they real? Are they hard to imagine? But if you go to a beach in southern Madagascar, you can see eggshells. I'm told reliably that David Attenborough has one of the few intact eggs that's still in existence. So these things were real. The animal that taught us that animals can go extinct was the Irish elk, because being very clever scientists, they said, well, that seems quite big. If that still existed, I think someone would have seen it. And you know that the Irish elk, you know it's there because you can dig it up from peat bogs, right? But these things are extinct. But they went extinct before we had modern history. And then the thing that gets me the most is cave art that shows that we spent most of our evolutionary history living alongside these animals. I wonder if anyone can think what the thing on the top left is. Those guys, I imagine, look quite scared of that. That's a giant ground sloth. And maybe on your lunch, you could go to the Natural History Museum, turn right, and you can see one. And they lived in South America. They went extinct about 10,000 years ago. Difficult to imagine. But if you go to South America, you can find their burrows, and you can see scratch marks on the walls from when they dug them out. So these things were very, very, very real, but we've forgotten them. And because we're scientists, because we like data, we start our graph at where we have good, robust, defendable data. But that baseline is probably wrong. This is probably a fairer representation of what has happened over the last 10,000 years. And so if you remember anything, I want you to remember shifting baseline syndrome, where each successive generation assumes that the diminished biological state is the norm. And you guys could go through life thinking that the way you see it now is what you should aspire to as you live through a life of biodiversity loss. So that's all been very depressing. Not a great way to start an exciting weekend with everyone doing such a good job of everyone getting motivated. So what can we do about it? What's next? Well, very fortunately, you're all here, because you have the opportunity to be the ones that see that trend of the last 10,000 years slow down, stop, and reverse. You guys could be the first generation in human history to die with more biodiversity loss than when you were born. And I would say if you were going to have any career working in conservation or the environment or anything associated with that, business, law, education, this is quite an exciting time to do it. You're alive at an amazing moment where history is going to be made. It's not going to be easy. We've got other problems at the same time. The biodiversity crisis compounded by the climate crisis. Trying to reverse that graph with a stable climate would be hard enough. But we're experiencing one of the most severe episodes of climate change in our history. We've also transformed the world. Look for the green squares. 4% of that image is green squares, and that is the mass. That is the mass of the Earth's land mammals that are wild. Everything else is us or our livestock. We've transformed the world beyond recognition. There's more people than ever before, but more important than that is that everyone deserves a better standard of living than they've ever had before. It's easy to accuse population growth of being behind all these challenges. But remember, conservation is a luxury. This is Maslow's hierarchy. Most people can't afford conservation. This is the famine early warning system in Ethiopia. It's easy to think that it's all of the world's fault, these trends that we're seeing. But for most people, conservation is a luxury they can't afford. So it falls to the part of the world that can afford it to make it possible. So this all seems rather bleak and a little bit impossible. We're talking about changing the trend for the last 10,000 years in the next 6. And I say the next 6 years because that is how long we have until the Global Biodiversity Framework targets of 2030. That's our global aspiration that almost 200 countries have signed up to. I'll just show you this. This is the change in education, in health, in poverty, in life expectancy, in vaccination over the last 200 years. If you'd said 200 years ago that we would lift 90% of people out of poverty in the next 2 decades, it would have been unimaginable. So this is reason to be optimistic. This is an amazing, almost unimaginable change in the quality of life for people over 200 years. And just think the tools we have now than when we started on this trajectory. We have an amazing opportunity. And then, think about yourselves. Think about the people in this room. You are sitting in a room with polar explorers, with people who've sailed the world, with the world's leading scientists, with the world's leading photographers and filmmakers and storytellers. And if you're very generously looking left and right for who those people are, sometimes it's also yourself, right? This is a remarkable room full of people. And so most of what I've talked to you about is shifting baselines, the fact that we're all biased against our frame of reference. But the advantage of being in this room is that you're changing your baseline. Doing some of these things seems impossible, seems incredibly difficult, until you meet the people that are here this weekend. And some of these challenges, particularly the next talk, which I'm very excited about, are suddenly going to seem a lot more achievable. If you're walking in the street talking to the average person, the idea of going to Antarctica might seem an absolute pipe dream, but have a coffee in the Royal Geographical Society, and all of a sudden it seems like, yeah, okay, I can see the steps towards achieving that. And so remember that the people you're going to meet here are going to make these big challenges seem very achievable. And that's important, because what you do now, in the next 6 years, in the next few decades, will change the world for the next 10, 15, 20 million years. That sounds like I'm just trying to be nice and generous to you guys, but it's true. When we look back at those stories I've just told you about the things that are extinct, we tell it from the rocks, from the sediment, from the fossils, from the ice cores, from the pollen cores in our lakes. And the decisions we make now, in the next few years, will be laid down in the earth for millennia. Anyone will be able to look back at the decisions you made. And they won't just look at the decisions that humanity made. They will look at the richest 1 or 2%. And if you're sitting here today, you might not feel it, but you are probably the most fortunate couple of percent of people alive today. You're the wealthiest, you're the best educated, and you have among the longest life expectancy. And on whose shoulders should this responsibility probably fall? Probably ours. The prize is amazing. The prize is to change the trajectory of the last 10,000 years and to leave the world with more biodiversity than when we started. And we all know all of the great things we get from biodiversity. So I will finish there with one last thing. I read something this week on one of those tech bro blogs, and it said, people will only remember 3 words of your talk, which is a little bit depressing. But I'm going to give you 5, and I'm going to hope you remember it. If not you, then who? Thanks very much.